Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you for creating this kind of incubator for ideas. The thing that happens here, unlike any other conferences I've been to, some you go to and they give you great ideas, others you go to and they give you great motivation. In the cocktail of both those worlds, we leave here differently. So thank you for what you're doing and changing our lives. So, yeah, thank you, Jeff. This right here is my family. These three people are what I live for in a very real and practical way. My two sons, Colsen and Keane, the namesake for our company, and they are 11 and 8, and my wife of 15 years, Taryn. And we have a great time parenting these wild young men. This summer, so I don't know what it's like for you in terms of parenting, but usually summer kind of slows down. For whatever reason, the first week of summer was insanely frenetic. Birthday parties and sleepovers and pool events, and my wife was chauffeuring our boys all over the place. Day 8, they come downstairs. All right, Mom, what are you going to do to entertain us today? And she says, it's done. Go play. And you got to understand, playing in our house is not as fun sometimes as playing in the neighbor's house. We have an old, dated Wii. It's not that cool. They don't have iPads and iPhones, and so when we say go play, that's old school. Like ride your bike, Legos, read, whatever you got to do, just get out there and go play and be. So I show up at 6 p.m. that night after work, and this is what I find in the backyard. My son, who created a hammock, at 10 o'clock in the morning, now this is 8 hours later, and he's lying in a hammock in his second volume of a novel that he is reading because he had nothing else to do. And so what he learned is something profound that I think his teacher taught us. And she said this, she says, as you go into summer break, allow your kids to be bored. Allow them to sit in the monotony of day to day. Because what she was saying was, when you somehow allow that, it creates something different for them. They begin to discover and play in ways that they never played before. So it was very fresh. It was very different. It was very unique. And instead of entertaining him, instead of looking at a tablet, he spent a day and a half or half a day creating and reading a couple of books. Transformative. 1929, my great-grandfather started a jewelry store in western New York. His son, my grandfather, became a clockmaker and worked for my great-grandfather. My father became a watchmaker and worked on, as a trifecta of 3 generations at that jewelry store. That jewelry store still exists. When it was time for me to make the decision whether or not I was going to work with my hands as a jeweler, I decided that was not my thing. I'm going to go off to college. I went off to school, graduated, jumped into the nonprofit sector, and spent, and still to this day, 25, 26 years serving in the nonprofit world. Spent my 20s and 30s traveling the globe, finding hurt and pain overseas, and aligning U.S. resources to try to help some of that hurt and pain. So I was having, and still am, having a blast. I'm changing the world. I know that. I'm not looking for this kind of feel-good thing that helps me realize I'm making my mark, I'm making a dent. So I kind of was living that sort of dream. I'm broaching my late 30s, and something began to surface for me, and I don't even know what it was, and I couldn't put my finger on it. I had a great marriage. I had 2 wonderful kids. I have a church that we started, and it was growing. I loved my life, but I felt like I wanted to introduce something else into my existence, and I wasn't even sure what that was. So I always loved leather goods. Some of my friends, they like to paint with canvas, or some like to sew, or some like to write songs, or play music, or learn a new instrument. I thought my canvas, maybe it'll be leather. So I went out and bought a piece of leather, and I got a few tools, and my son and I, we went up into the guest room, set up a table, and had this little station where we'd make belts, and it was like camp, right? You know, comb holders, and all this kind of crap that we'd put on us in leatherware, and just had a great time doing it. Well, at the same time, Steve Jobs comes on the scene, and he says, we've got a piece of technology that's going to change your life, and it was the iPad. And so I thought, oh, that's awesome. I'm one of the guys that stood in line, spend the night waiting to get my iPad or my iPhone over the years. And so I got my iPad 3 days later, like 10 million other people did. The iPad shows up, and the first thing I Google on my fresh, clean iPad is for a case, for a cover. It was the first time ever I got zero response from Google. They didn't exist because the industry had not caught up with it yet. So I thought, okay, well, in the meantime, I've got to make something to protect this thing. So I went upstairs and put together this kind of sheath envelope kind of deal. I come downstairs and I show my wife, and she says, you need to put that on Etsy. I said, no, babe, I don't knit. I'm not selling Beanie Babies. No. She goes, you put it on Etsy. I said, all right. So I created an Etsy account and some bad copy and used my bad iPhone and took a picture of it and put it up there. And my inbox lit up. I fell into something. I began to realize that other people were Googling an iPad cover, and I was one of the only guys out there making these. And so before I knew it, I'm stitching iPad covers like I'm losing my mind. All night long, I'm stitching these things. I was working, not only did we have our church, but I was working for a consulting firm at the time. And we'd be on the road doing these consulting gigs. And between these gigs, I'm out there stitching iPad cases because I needed every second I could do. And so we decided, well, what if we offer some other items? What if we offer belts and wallets? And will people buy that stuff? And they did. And I said, well, what if we brand who we are as doing custom work? Meaning we'll do stuff that nobody else will do. Will people buy our stuff? And they did. And they started calling me up and saying, hey, can you make a bag with a baseball kind of theme? Yeah, sure. I had no idea how to make a bag. So he went through a bunch of hides and finally figured it out. Another person called up and said, hey, can you make a toiletry case? Yeah, sure, we'll make a toiletry case and figure out how to make that, and we did that. Another guy calls me up and says, I need 150 bags in 8 weeks for my clients. Can you make it happen? Of course I can make it happen. I've got 2 kids and a wife. We can figure this thing out in a heartbeat. And we did, and we figured it out, and we began to streamline. We began to say, all right, what is it we're becoming? What is it we want to see happen? What is it we would like to do? And so we started creating products that were a little bit more, I guess, predictable, and that we could then sell to the masses, for lack of a better term. But we work on this stuff with our hands. This is we put our heart, we bleed into this stuff. We love what we get to make, and by the way, that model is not me, in case you're wondering. But these bags are just, again, they're kind of part of our heart. They're a part of our soul, and what we know about leather is it lasts forever, and it becomes your story, and it becomes your narrative. And so we're having this really, really great time. And what I began to realize, it was this kind of ironic expression. I was, in essence, going back to my founding. My parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents worked with their hands, and they had like this secret to life, that there's something profound about working with your hands. I mean, again, I'm changing the world. I'm doing all the service stuff, but at the end of the day, I come home and I've got nothing to show for it in terms of something of substance. And I begin to dance in this kind of world while simultaneously changing the world, and loved it. And here's what I came to understand. And I don't know how this sits for you, but I've come to this realization that monotony management is important, and it's one of those things I just got to embrace. This isn't rocket science, but if you don't know it, it'll haunt you. And so part of it is just realizing every 6 months for me, I go through this season of boredom. I'm like, oh man, it's like my wife kicked me outside and said, go play. And but now I know that it's there. Now I know it's a part of the reality. But the problem is you have to balance the pedantic. Because if you're like me, and you're an entrepreneur, and you're starting things, you're making things happen, a lot of it counts on you. So you're controlling a whole bunch of different stuff. You're micromanaging a whole bunch of different things, and you find yourself, if you're not careful, quickly getting caught up and just doing a bunch of details, but those details really are not pushing the ball down the field. And so you find yourself kind of just saying, well, you know what, I'm bored, so I'm going to do something even more boring, and you just get caught up in the pedantic. Or you get caught up in social media. You get caught up in an hour later, you surface out of Facebook, and you realize, who cares about Aunt Stella's need? I got to get back to my deal. And so if we're not careful, sometimes what begins to happen is we get caught up in the minutia. I've got a label maker gun. You know what I'm talking about, those label guns? I'm obsessed with it. I label everything. I label my wife's credit cards so she doesn't use the wrong one, like a business card and personal and the church card and all these things. And she gets so embarrassed every time she hands it over because there's a big old label like Colsen Keane on it or personal. And because I love to micromanage things, and so what ends up happening, sometimes when I get too bored, I get caught up in the details. But now I've come to this realization is that these seasons happen for me. Like I said, they happen about every 6 months. And here's what I do now when those seasons of boredom ensue. I find myself sitting back with a little bit more of intentionality and discipline, saying, all right, what is it I want to do in the future? What are the things I would like to see happen? I've got a whole list. I'm a huge Evernote fan. And in Evernote, I have hundreds of ideas of new leather initiatives that we want to do. I have 4 or 5 business ventures I would love to see happen. And it's not even a money issue, it's more of a time issue. There's just not enough time to do all the stuff we want to do, right, guys? And so now what happens is when I hit these times of boredom, I literally sit back in my leather chair and I begin to take in and kind of dream about new ideas. And just play and let it go. Because that's productive. Because I'm going to get back to the pedantic. I'm going to get back to invoicing people and making leather bags. And I'm going to kick back into really liking doing that. But for the time being, it helps kind of allow me to manage my monotony well. And then here's the last thing I'll leave with this. Boredom might be the impetus to discovering your passion, not just your profession. So my generation is labeled Generation X. That's what they used to call us. I don't know if they call us anymore, but that's what they used to call us. And so when I was starting out working, when I started out my career in the early 90s, there was a statistician and some smart dude out of some journal, I don't remember even where it was. And he said this, that my generation would experience 7 career shifts. Now hear that, not 7 different jobs, but career shifts. Of many of you are nodding your head saying, yeah, that's me. You graduate with a degree in engineering, and then you decide, you know what, I don't like numbers and lines, and I've already done 2 engineering gigs. I'm going to go jump into something else. And you jump into some other experience, and you know what? I'm tired of sales, so I'm going to go to school and go back and get some education. And you jump around, and what this statistician was almost prophetic in understanding was this: that my generation, when we get bored, we jump ship. We jump to the next thing. And what ends up happening is we become pretty good at jumping ship and getting on to the next thing pretty quickly. So we imbibe our profession and do it pretty well and might even get paid pretty well. But it's not your passion. Very different. And often what happens, because we leave and we jump ship so quickly, that we don't get this opportunity to really kind of simmer in our situation. Instead of allowing the boredom to be an impetus to pushing you forward, it becomes the impetus to pushing you out, and you don't become sort of the expert. You don't give the proverbial 10,000 hours that it might take for you to kind of move in this place so that your career, it becomes your obsession. So about 10 years ago, I jumped onto a board of an organization called Equitas. And I'm sorry I don't have the slide up here, but equitas.cc. And what we do is we help educate high school age students in Malawi, Africa. And in Malawi, Africa, they don't pay for high school. It's sort of like college here. You got to kind of fend for yourself. And so we come around these children and we try to help them in terms of tribal poverty, taking them out of the tribe and putting them in a school system so that they can have a chance to kind of make a new life for themselves. And we're investing in these kids. And so Equitas, of which I'm a board member, of which Colsen Keane invests in heavily, we're seeing 200 kids this year who are experiencing high school that would not ever have experienced high school. So when I think about jumping ship for Colsen Keane, saying, you know what, man, if I cut my hand one more time on a razor blade or a tool, when I think about that, it's different for me now because it's not just my career. It's not just my profession. It's my passion. Like lives hang in the balance. It's a different gig. So boredom and monotony actually can fuel your passion. Maybe not your profession, but it can sure as heck fuel your passion. We're dreaming these days. We're not there yet, but we've got a dream for Colsen Keane. I talked to the guys a couple years ago. We're a small little leather firm. I mean, I've got 2 leathersmiths and a project kind of coordinator to myself. That's it. That's 4. And I circled the troops a couple years ago, and I said, guys, what would it look like if we hire people that nobody else would hire? What would it look like? I mean, what we do here is not rocket science, right? We just need to create a system that can absorb the accountability and all the things that it takes to be able to hire people that nobody else would hire. What does that begin to look like? And you can see all of a sudden, these guys are saying, we don't just make leather bags, do we? Like for them, it's not just their profession. It might even be their passion. And sometimes sitting in the monotony of routine, sitting in the monotony of the day-to-day experiences are actually what catalyze you and I for deep change. So plywood people, what does it look like to be bored? What does it look like to bask in the monotony of a job and a career that you feel like it's torturing you, but have you ever stopped and said, well, what's it look like if I take these times of boredom and I go forward with them? So may you learn to rest in monotony. May it become part of your ritual. May it become part of your routine. May it become something that you say, you know what, I'm finding deep-seated traction here. May it be the kind of thing that sets you loose, not just to obsess over your profession, but your passion. Thank you. Okay.